Welcome to this first episode of Tech Command Investing podcast with me and my esteemed guest, Chris Moore, who is VP of Defense and Security at Eutelsat OneWeb. Today, we'll be discussing the groundbreaking world of satellite communications for dual use and military applications and the investment opportunities within this field. So, morning, Chris. How are you today?
Good morning. And well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to share what little knowledge I know, but hopefully it's of use. I'm great, thanks. It's Wednesday, halfway through the week, and so half of the week's done. Looking forward to a very fast second half.
Yeah, great. So, just jumping into the different topics on this, Chris, you've had an extensive career in defense from your time as Air Vice-Marshal to now as VP Defense and Security at Eutelsat OneWeb. How have you seen the role of satellite communications evolve in defense and security over the last decade?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think extensive decode that means I'm pretty old and I've been around for a bit. I think is what you're trying to say. Actually, throughout my career in the military, Satcom has been a thread right from my very first tour, where I was a satellite operations officer flying the Skynet 4 satellites back in the early 90s, and through all of the jobs I've done across a very diverse range of military jobs, space has either been the primary or one of the secondary threads that have really helped focus me on how crucial the space domain is to military operations. Um, and, as I say, Satcoms is nothing new. It's been around before my time. Back to your question, what has happened the last decade is there has been, some disruption in terms of how the economic model for space has worked and the technology has followed suit. I would highlight probably, throughout my career, the focus for satellite communications has been on geosynchronous satellites, and that has been where most of my military career has been based on. But in the last 10 years, we've seen the advent of LEO, low Earth orbit, and medium Earth orbit constellations. And the benefits of those orbits has been known for a long time. The problem is the economic model to put satellites in those orbits hasn't been there. And what's happened in the last 10 years has that the cost of launch, manufacturer, and technology has made both NEO and LEO commercially viable. So what you have now over the last decade is true multi-orbit satellite communications. Now, people like Iridium and others would say that they've been doing this for a long time, and in many respects, they were the pioneers of early low Earth orbit SATCOM. But what's happened in the last decade or so is this has scaled up to enormous constellations, and really disrupted the service that you can provide military operators wherever they are in the world.
Hmm, hmm, hmm. And so, moving on then to dual use technologies, SATCOMs have increasingly been used for dual use purpose, serving both civilian and military needs. What are the key advantages of having SATCOMs that can cater to both sectors? What are the challenges in managing such a dual use asset? And maybe a follow on question to that is, do you see any conflicts of interests arising or humanitarian versus military use in the battlefield? Yeah, your thoughts would be great on that.
Yeah, I mean, again, the use of commercial technology, and particularly SATCOM technology, is nothing new. Again, on many operations that I've served on, we've used commercial SATCOM throughout my career. What's happened is that used to be the model used to be where you would need highly assured and highly secure stuff. You put it over military means, and on the commercial side, where you want higher data rates and more utility, you put it on commercial. But that sort of linear or binary delineation has sort of blurred in recent years. So the use of commercial military satcom is blurring fast. Now the advantages of commercial technology is where again, at the start of my career, military SATCOM, the technology was leading industry. Now, commercial tech is leading very much where the military is. So the big advantages is the ability for militaries to harness cutting edge technology that is being developed at a real pace. Um, and the model used to be, as I said, that there was a suspicion that commercial technology wasn't as secure as military. Well, given the with the pervasive cyber threat now, commercial technology is becoming highly assured and very, very secure because, particularly in the cyber domain, threat actors are targeting commercial systems as they are as much as military. So again, that word assurance and security, the gap is closing fast between military and commercial systems because of the all pervasive threat that's happening. Um, I suppose so. The tech is the obvious bit, and you can cite examples in Ukraine and indeed other conflicts where this is really having a game changing effect on how militaries operate, configure themselves, and also we're seeing the advent of things like autonomous platforms, which we can talk about a bit later, where the connectivity is key. So there I think the advantages, or some of the advantages. The challenges, I think, are because of the utility and the increasing dependency on commercial satcom. It's becoming a more of a target for the adversary, and you've got some real sort of complex policy and commercial and legal challenges now as to what you can and can't use commercial tech for. And it is really stretching us every day, both in terms of governments and also commercial companies, on where is that boundary, particularly as the pace of um, confrontation, warfare, and indeed environmental challenges. It's really pushing the boundaries of how we use commercial satcom today. Um, I think also that one of the challenges is given the pace of commercial development, is how military procurement can keep pace with it. And the only time it really keeps pace of it is when countries are at war. So you've seen, countries like Ukraine rapidly bring into service some cutting edge commercial technology. But when countries are not at war and that they're in either a time of peace or a heightened readiness, it's difficult to get the military procurement systems to operate at the pace they need to be. The trouble is, yes, you can buy SATCOM terminals pretty quickly, but if you want to evolve the capabilities of a constellation, it takes a bit longer. So, we don't have months and years of notice to evolve these things. So, really looking at how militaries procure SATCOM, I think we need to have a much more agile way of doing it.
I'm following on from that, from the humanitarian versus military use. I noted in a recent blog from Elon Musk, or not blog, but his book, that he shut off his Starlink when they were being used for military purposes. Is that something that you've encountered in your experience?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of conjecture about what Elon did and didn't do. I mean, I'm not going to offer a view on the reality of that, but it is a complex area for all of us. And at the end of the day, both systems like Starlink and indeed Eutelsat OneWeb were designed for commercial operation. We're not designed for military operations. However, the commercial technology that we bring has utility in the battle space. So where that line is drawn as to what is acceptable and what is not is a real difficult area. And Ukraine has obviously brought a lot of that to the forefront. It is as much a legal and policy challenge as is about the technology. And we work very closely with governments and indeed other industry providers because we want to try and sort of make sure we're all coherent on that to find out where that line is at the moment. But we also need to know, whilst some of the use cases are highly interesting and could be highly lucrative, we've also got to understand the consequences of using our technology in ways that it was never designed for. And we've got to be really sort of risk aware of those use cases.
Hmm. Yeah, and moving on from that point exactly about resilience and security in satcoms, yeah, in the context of defense, the security of communications is crucial. How does Eutelsat OneWeb ensure resilience in cybersecurity in its satellite networks, especially when considering adversarial threats in the space domain? And I remember an example from Airbus where their satellite images were being uh, doctored to show that Ukraine had no power, when in fact there was power across Ukraine. Do you have similar experiences at OneWeb regarding that in cybersecurity threats?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've touched on it before. Security, having good security and resilience is not just a requirement for defense and security. So the defense and security agencies is all, our enterprise customers like telecommunications companies. They all have very high demands for security and resilience too. So this is not unique to defense. Therefore, our customer base are demanding that when they use our services, they can do so with confidence that it's secure. So therefore, we in the company take this very seriously. The types of things we do is first and foremost, you need to be aware of the threat and the capability of the threat actors up against you. Secondly, you need to be aware of your own vulnerabilities and never trust anyone that tells you that their system is completely secure. There is always a balance between utility and security. If you had a 100% secure system, it would be unusable. So we try to strike the right balance with what we're offering in Eutelsat OneWeb. Um, so what we do is, we're constantly aware of where our vulnerabilities are. Um, and then we used our own red team. So we have a hired individual that goes around hacking our networks day in, day out. We also use bug bounty schemes where we pay ethical hackers to try and find holes in our defenses. And when we find weaknesses, we fix them and fix them pretty quickly. But as I said, you'll always have vulnerabilities, and I suppose the third part here is then once you know your vulnerabilities, you fix the ones that need fixing, and where you've chosen to tolerate those vulnerabilities, it's about managing the risk on that, and we take that very seriously in the company. I would also point out that everyone tends to focus on the space assets when talking about it's like constellations. Actually, it's the ground segment that I think is the bigger part of the cyber vulnerability, and actually a lot of focus needs to be placed on there, not just the things above our heads. And I suppose the final bit about security is, again, everyone naturally focuses on the tech, but the most important is making sure your people, both in terms of your employees, but also your supply chain, are aware of the threat, and they know what to do if they've been targeted, and educating the workforce is really important.
Yeah, and then moving on, I remember we were in a space defense conference a couple of weeks ago where we had a conversation about this and about the space demand. They were showing examples of space becoming a critical battleground for assets being attacked by both Chinese and Russian satellites. As someone with your deep defense experience, how concerned should governments be about militarization of space? Do you foresee any specific strategies or policies that could emerge around satellite communications and space security?
Yeah, again, the militarization of space is nothing new. I suppose the awareness of the militarization of space is now much more in the public view. So I think people are aware much more than they were previously of what was going on. But what is increasing is digitized society's reliance on space, and the ones and noughts that transit through and from space, whether it be for satcoms, whether it be for things like precision navigation and precision and navigation timing, surveillance, monitoring, intelligence gathering, all of that now. So some modern societies have that embedded at their core. So space is fundamental to any nation's critical national infrastructure. And in many respects, my role in the company is to work with governments and help them move from talking the talk to walking the walk around ensuring what we provide is resilient to their needs. And one solution never will provide complete resilience. It's often working as part of a hybrid architecture, whether it's terrestrial, subterranean, satcom, whatever. It's making sure the package for governments is resilient. And with a digitized society, this is becoming ever more important as our food, water, financial, energy systems are all reliant in some respect to space-based systems. So it's a worrying but fascinating challenge, and space is absolutely critical, as you say, in terms of making sure that we can protect and defend our assets up there.
Yeah, I think one of the ministers was mentioning £1 billion a day lost GDP revenue if we lose GPS, for example. I hate to think what it is about other Earth observation and satellite communication satellites.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely, and we, in the company are investing heavily in technologies that reduce our dependencies on GPS. So, for example, we're just literally going to market at the moment with a bolt-on module to our user terminals, which means that in a denied GPS environment, the terminals can still operate, which is again a cutting edge development that we're doing, which hopefully will convince militaries and other organizations that we can fight through GPS denied environments.
Yeah, and following on from that, could you talk a bit about some of the critical collaborations or partnerships that Eutelsat OneWeb have with military organizations and governmental agencies? And how do these partnerships shape the design and deployment of satellite networks?
Yeah, it's definitely a two-way conversation. We're a global company. We work with militaries and governments around the world. We also cooperate with other industry partners. So our business model is one of a B2B, business to business model. So we cooperate with telecoms companies, established satcom resellers. So it really is a team effort in understanding the emerging requirements and quickly evolving the service that we provide. And I've been in the company 3 years, and in that 3 years, we've launched a 650 satellite constellation. We've built an extensive ground segment, but we've also evolved the service pretty quickly. And I have to sometimes pinch myself that it's just been 3 years. In my military career, that sort of evolution probably would have taken 30 years. So, it is about listening. It's about getting out there, understanding what countries and companies require. And it's also about watching the news and watching how conflicts are playing out and evolving to make sure that we're at the forefront of that evolution.
And then moving on from there, maybe a little bit about SATCOMs that are increasingly being used for real-time intelligence in battlefield conditions. I mean, Helsing is a good example of that being used. How do you see this capability expanding, and what innovations on the horizon to improve connectivity for troops in the field? What do you see evolving on the SATCOMs front?
Yeah. So as we talked about before, the Satcoms has gone through a big disruptive evolution with Neo and Leo. And the sort of super strengths of Leo are that in terms of our constellation, you've got global coverage. So first of all, wherever you are on the planet, you'll have broadband-like access. So whether it's on the North Pole, at the top of a mountain, in the middle of the sea, you can get up to just below 200 megabits of capability. Should you know that? So that is an absolute game changer in terms of the quantity, the bandwidth that you can provide access to. I suppose the other advantage is because we're so much nearer to the Earth, the latency of our signal, i.e., the time it takes to go up and down, is much less than that of GEO. What that does, enables real time collaboration. So, for example, we're on a Zoom call at the moment, and it's as if we were, on Leo. It's as if you were sat in your front room. It's that sort of quality of service. Over traditional geo means that real time interaction is a bit more clunky. Geo has its strengths, and it's very good for certain things like video broadcast and what have you. But back to your question of where it's really changing the way military fight is low latency means you can get real time collaboration, whether it's between people, but interestingly, more and more so about machine to machine connectivity. And as you watch the news, you're seeing the massive explosion of autonomous platforms, which they're not really autonomous. They do have actually some links back to enable them to adapt to ever changing battle space. But to make sure that they can operate in a contested environment, they need real time connectivity, and that's where you see Leo Satcom adding real value. Uh, so yeah, there's just a few examples where what we're providing is really changing the way that militaries fight. I mean, I grew up my military career where the way that militaries tend to configure themselves, which is very hierarchical and very centralized, although people would argue it's not, it kind of is. What Ukraine has shown is that when you provide connectivity to the tactical edge, you can decentralize certain operations. And when you decentralize, what that means is that they can operate a lot more quickly and outmaneuver the enemy because they're not constantly asking back for direction. So again, it's not just and what the tech is enabling, it's also it's forcing militaries to think differently how they organize and configure and fight themselves. So it really is having a disruptive effect. One other area where it's really important, less eye catching than the war fighting, is welfare. Military is now, and we have a generation of youngsters joining the military that have grown up with connectivity at home, and when they go to far flung places, they need and want good connectivity. So providing good welfare services, whether you're on a ship, on an aircraft, or indeed on the ground, providing welfare services to keep morale high is becoming critical. So again, what we provide in the company is enable others to provide very rich welfare services, everything from your Netflix to gaming or what have you. So it's really important just to the moral component.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose that's a good segue into the spectrum and bandwidth management. So how managing spectrum and bandwidth in satcoms is a delicate balancing act, as you said earlier, especially in defense applications. How does Eutelsat OneWeb approach the challenges of spectrum allocation and ensure that both civilian and defense sectors get optimal performance? So how do you make sure that you don't, yeah, unbalance that that balancing act?
Yeah, I mean, the first and foremost is that we've got to make sure we're a responsible player in this field. We're not, whilst we're competing for revenue, we need to play nicely with both governments and our competitors. And we're very fortunate that we're fast out of the blocks when it comes certainly to low Earth orbit filings. That we are, we got priority at KU band and a very high priority at KA band. That means that others have to coordinate with us to use that, which is good. Um, and we made sure that we did it through the correct process, which being through the UK Ofcom regulator into the ITU, and made sure that there was good notification and good cooperation with our industry colleagues out there. So we do play fairly, we do respect the rules, and it's not a black and white art. Well, it's both science and art, but we tried to play fairly, and we tried to get a reputation of listening as well as exploiting what we have. Spectrum is absolutely key, though. I reflect on my last conference in uniform where I stood up in front of the conference. The theme of the conference was cyber. And at the time, defense had woken up to the threat of cyber and was getting investment and putting real energy to it. But at the end of the conference, I said there's three main areas for you in the audience to focus on going forward. And it's electromagnetic spectrum, and electromagnetic spectrum. Um, the what had happened, we used to be very good at it in the Cold War, but years in Iraq and Afghanistan where the threat didn't really manifest itself in the electromagnetic spectrum. So we lost a lot of the technology and the skill sets to do that. What we've seen with Ukraine, but actually prior to that in Syria and others, was the emergence of electronic warfare again. And so there's a real drive now in militaries around the world to relearn and redevelop electromagnetic capabilities. And you've probably heard the argument in Ukraine that it's as much a battle for the spectrum as it is about a battle for the land and the territory. So we're playing our part in that. We're being a responsible actor, but we're also very aware of the threat and developing countermeasures, as I mentioned earlier. Things like GPS jamming, how we can counter that, to make sure that we can continue to deliver a service to our customers.
Mhm. And now moving on maybe to some innovation in the SATCOM space, AST and Science under the brand name Space Mobile with their Blue Walker satellites. I think it's something like 693 square feet phased array. It's said to launch massive satellites the size of football fields, promising to deliver SATCOMs directly to the mobile phone in our pockets. With this game changing technology going commercial next year, how do you foresee this impacting the SATCOM landscape, especially in defense and security applications? Could this be a disruptive force in the way military operations approach communications in the field? Your thoughts would be great on that.
Yeah, I won't comment on specific companies and their capabilities, but I will generalize in terms of the direction of travel. The example you quoted is not in its own a disruptive event. Others are looking at direct-to-device technology. And as I mentioned earlier, the last 10 years with the advent of LEO MEO, there's been a huge sort of disruptive leap in terms of what SATCOM can provide. But as we have an ever more digitized society and capabilities, you need a range of capabilities. So direct to device is one, but also critical national infrastructure, cloud-based stuff, video services. There's a whole range of use cases where different technologies will really enable and change the game. But space on its own is not the panacea here. It's a combination of space, terrestrial, and subterranean connectivity. What comes together provides a connected society. But there's some really exciting developments in space. The technology, as we've seen, space with the geo world was evolution was constant over many years, but there was a big leap when the economic model for MEO and LEO came into force. And what you've seen since, as I mentioned earlier, the cost of launch, the cost of manufacture, and the cost of tech dropping, it means that the evolution of SATCOM capability is accelerating. So there's some really exciting stuff up there, and the challenge for a company like us is, having been and are at the forefront of some of this stuff, the challenge for us is to how do we stay there? Because the market is changing enormously quickly.
Mhm. And maybe coming back to your point about the role of AI and automation in SATCOM's operations, with AI and automation becoming pivotal in modern technologies, and we see it all the time, ChatGPT and so on. How are these tools being applied to SATCOM systems in military contexts to enhance performance and decision-making capabilities? And then maybe addition to that, do you see any emerging themes on the investing area of companies that are, uh, helping maybe with Eutelsat OneWeb to maybe evolve the AI and automation in SATCOMs?
Yeah, I suppose there's two parts to this question. The first part is how are we as a company using, AI, that sort of loose loose phrase, and automation, and how is the customer using it, as in the military forces. So starting with us, I mean, we've got an enormously complex space and ground system of systems. As I mentioned, 650. There are enough satellites up there, the ground stations, it's just short of 50 when completed around the world. And the satellites being in low Earth orbit are moving at tremendous speed. So, each satellite from horizon to horizon, from a user terminal's perspective, is only 2 to 3 minutes. So it's a highly dynamic and changing environment. And people, in the traditional sense of SATCOM operations, can't do that now. So at the heart of our technology and other big LEOs now is automation. We've got a huge data engine that sucks in a terabyte of data every day. And a lot of what we do in terms of flying and managing the constellation is automated and heavily reliant on the technology. We still, of course, have people in the loop to spot the anomalies and to do things that were unexpected. But largely, our systems operate themselves. And we're in the area now where we're looking at predictive analytics, not just reacting to stuff. So we're trying to predict when things go wrong, so we can actually preempt the fault before it manifests itself. So the I keep saying to colleagues, yes, we're a space business, but actually at the heart of it, we're a data business in terms of running what we're doing. Um, Back to your question, how are customers or the military is using it? Um, in a range of roles, but I suppose that where we're seeing the most rapid development is the convergence of cloud-based technologies, mobility, and space. Now, the problem with traditional geo services, when you put cloud-based services, you're reaching back for your information two ways. It introduces significant delays and makes the experience a bit clunky. Now that at low Earth orbit, in particular, um, where you have requirements for high latency, sorry, for low latency, we can enable cloud-based apps that are located anywhere around the world to be as you were sitting and using them at home. You're very, very fast and reactive. So what that means is it's bringing supercompute power to the tactical edge. So it really is providing a rich range of services on top of what traditional geo services provide, your video and your streaming. But this now is allowing that supercompute cloud-based technology for real-time applications to be available right at the tactical edge. And as I said before, that will change the way that militaries operate and organize.
Mm, 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 mm. And then, of course, with the rise of LEO satellites, Eutelsat OneWeb is known for its LEO satellite constellation. What specific advantages do LEO satellites offer for military and defense use cases compared to traditional geostationary satellites? And I know you mentioned low latency as a point. Are there other advantages, especially for the military, that they see with LEO?
Yeah, as you say, I mentioned I went well on low latency, which is one of our super strengths. I've also mentioned global coverage. So, look, the high north, for example, now, the Arctic and indeed Antarctica, they're becoming strategically important. And because of the geography and the look angles of geo satellites that tend to be around the sort of equatorial plane, you really struggle to get the look angles from your satellite terminals at the Arctic and Antarctic. But because the way that the dynamics of low Earth orbit constellations work, you get great coverage at the poles. So, from a military perspective, we can add connectivity anywhere on the planet and give the customer an outstanding service. I suppose also the other thing that we can provide militaries is resilience. It's not just one satellite that if you take it out, you deny the communication. At any one time, a user will have multiple satellites in view. So if you take one out, the system will auto reconfigure and still provide a seamless service. So that resilience from having many satellites up there is a huge benefit. But also, that strength gives it's also a vulnerability in terms of because of the reliance on the complexity and the data. Cyber security has to be very, very good to protect ourselves from enemies targeting us. Cyber security is probably the most likely threat vector that we see. I mean, direct ascent satellite weapons, yes, very high profile, very damaging environmentally. You'd probably run out of missiles before you put a dent in us and other so-called mega constellations. We have the inbuilt resilience to deal with a lot of disruption.
And then maybe moving on to Satcoms in humanitarian and disaster relief beyond military applications. I mean, because of their ability to reach all areas, Satcoms also play a vital role in disaster recovery and where normal networks have been disrupted. How does Eutelsat OneWeb contribute to these efforts, and how do you balance these responsibilities with defense requirements?
Yeah, I mean, the first point I should bring up is that it's not humanitarian versus military applications. Military, I've been involved with many humanitarian operations when in uniform, so there is an overlap between the two. But you're absolutely right. Humanitarian and disaster relief, whether it's a hurricane, an earthquake, or what have you, what tends to happen is your 4G, 5G masts are blown down, your your fiber connectivity is disrupted, so connectivity tends to go down pretty quickly. So what we can now provide very, very quickly is we can restore connectivity. So, for example, we can create a 4G or a 5G mobile network, pop-up network by connecting into our system and providing a relay. So then getting the society back online and back communicating is critical. We're also, highly, our terminals are very small, so they can be packed literally into your backpack and taken with you. So you can get literally as your first boots are on the ground, you can have connectivity within minutes up there. Again, that's critical, not just for those providing the humanitarian and disaster relief. It's also critical for, getting the word out there and starting to communicate with people to let them what's going on. So, we've been involved with a lot already, both, from a geo perspective over the years, but increasingly with Leo now, where there has been, environmental or other disasters, we're offering capability to support people and get societies reconnected.
Mm-hmm. And then maybe moving on from there regarding sustainability and space debris. As a number of satellites in space, I think there's 10,000 around there at the moment. Maybe I'm wrong. It's growing exponentially in any case. It was a couple of hundred or even less than that in the 1960s. Um, how does Eutelsat OneWeb address these concerns in its satellite constellations? And what steps is the industry taking to ensure that space remains a viable and safe environment for commercial and defense operations in the future?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very topical, and good question. I mean, look, we get it. We, in the company are investing significant amounts of resource, people, funding, to make sure that we are market leading in this respect. It's in our interest to make sure space is a safe operating environment, because if not, we'll be out of business pretty quickly. So we're very keen on being known as a responsible actor. So everything from how we design our satellites, that once they come to their end of life, we then bring them out of orbit and burn them up. We're leaving very little trace, so not leaving any debris behind. Our satellites, should we lose control of one and be unable to deorbit it, they're built with a device on the back that enables, as the emerging technologies, to remove satellites from orbits. We design that in. Materials we use are, good, in terms of making sure that we dispose of them correctly. And in many respects, yes, there is a race, but more and more up there, and there needs to be it needs to be carefully managed. We believe at the moment our software, which is constantly getting better, is on top of the challenge, but we're also alive to a risk, and one mistake or one misjudgment can cause a lifetime of problem. So we cooperate with other industry players very well, some of which are our competitors, but actually we coordinate behind the scenes very well with them. We coordinate with governments. We're sharing information the whole time. We're playing our part in being a responsible actor in space going forward.
Mm. And then finally, looking ahead, if you had to predict one major breakthrough in satellite communications that will fundamentally change military operations in the next 10 years, what would it be and why?
Wow. um, I'm not going to focus on the tech. I'm going to focus on contracts and commercial. Um, Again, when I grew up in the military, the model was that you had your brave men and women that used to get in their tanks, ships, and planes and go off to war with an industry supply chain that sat behind them. So you had this sort of customer supplier relationship. Increasingly now, we've seen in Ukraine, but actually it predates Ukraine, is that industry's on the front line of conflicts now. You've got Maxar, Microsoft, Starlink, others, ourselves, we're on the front line of military operations, but we're still operating on traditional methods of contracting and commercial arrangements, which is a bit transactional. I think the big breakthrough is where you have increasing partnerships, long-term relationships with a commercial model that incentivizes both to both evolve to the threat, but also protect and defend those assets. So I think one is the breakthrough. I think will be in relationships. It won't be in technology. And if we can get that relationship right, you get the benefits of the amazing technology that the commercial companies are developing, but you also get the geostrategic and political benefits of working with friendly governments to provide, the critical national infrastructure for any company. So a bit of a cop out. I've gone from not an eye catching tech answer to one of commercial and contracts.
Mm-hmm. Chris, thanks for that enlightening interview. Before we conclude today's enlightening conversation, if you're an LP interested in learning about space, defense, and security tech, including cybersecurity investment opportunities, let's chat. That concludes today's episode. Thanks, Chris, for joining me. Thanks for everyone tuning in, and see you next time.
Thank you. A real pleasure.